Okay, yeah, I'm Sander, and I'm a postdoc working with Don Browning. And I come from a background of lush, deciduous eastern forests, so I'm quite enjoying the learning about the complexity of the desert. And today, yeah, I want to talk about a little bit about ecosystem responses to various environmental drivers across a transition of ecological states. And just to start and give some context to some of the motivation behind this work, this is just a map that's obtained from the NASA Observatory, which shows kind of the discrepancy across the contiguous U.S. of soil wetness, really. So you can see that, and I'm sure all of you know this already, how dry the western states are compared to some in the east and in the Midwest. And with this coupled with ongoing and increased likelihood of drought, it's kind of a dire situation to understand how our vegetation and ecosystems are responding to environmental drivers moving forward. So if you focus on New Mexico, where we are, we're pretty consistently in severe, extreme, or exceptional drought. And if we put this in the context of the globe, drylands really cover about 40% or more of the terrestrial surface, and they exist in these regions that are expected to get hotter and drier moving forward. And they also happen to be recognized as the dominant driver in both the trend and variability in carbon flux in these global terrestrial systems. Further complicating this actually is that arid systems are increasingly likely to undergo this ecological state change. This figure comes from a paper it's about a decade old now, which Brandon was actually on, and I just really think it highlights this transition. As I'm getting to know the desert in this area, I'm learning more about these types of transitions. But this image was taken from just outside of Albuquerque, and over this 80-year period, it demonstrates this transition between a grassland and then the shrub encroachment and turning into a shrub-dominated landscape. It's kind of thought that these two end member states can be these bistable, so they're both alternative stable states that exist. But going along this transition, depending upon where you are in this transition of ecological state, really influences what you might expect how the ecosystem would be functioning, right? So you have this grassland moving into a shrub encroachment, and as shrubs start to encroach before even turning into this shrubland, how they respond to environmental drivers and what they're actually providing as ecosystem function is variable. And also kind of important to note is that once this transition occurs, this shift can occur due to various disturbances, such as wildfire or land management practices. And once that transition occurs, even if you remove that practice or that disturbance, it won't necessarily return back to the state that it's in. It's also highly characteristic of the heterogeneity in vegetation across these drylands, which contribute to that trend in variability and uncertainty in global carbon fluxes and understanding and what that's happening moving forward. So we're sort of lucky in a sense that we can research and investigate some of these dynamics across this landscape because we have examples of this transition. And I'm probably going to repeat this several times because the end of this presentation really drives home this point, but these sites are all within about a kilometer of one another. These are a part of the Phenocam network, so we have a shrubland in the furthest north, then in the farthest south is the grassland, and then in the middle there is kind of the transition between the two. Each of these sites have a Phenocam, and so each of these images are showing on the same day a Phenocam image from each of these sites, and that really highlights the difference in vegetation makeup and also the percentage of bare soil, which can influence surface energy balance, wind erosion, influences in carbon stock, and nutrients that are available there at the soil surface along this gradient. I also want to highlight all the figures that I'm going to be showing are going to keep this color scheme. And so just to kind of orient your brains with that. So we have this high temporal frequency of near surface digital imagery. If you're not familiar with Phenocam, they take images every half hour of that ecosystem. And then we can couple this with eddy covariance, which if you're not familiar with eddy covariance, These towers are basically just fancy weather stations. So they're equipped with instruments that measure precipitation and net radiation, um, sonic anemometers that have measure wind speed and direction, and then we have infrared gas analyzers that get at the carbon and water fluxes from the land to the atmosphere. And this allows us to explore ecosystem response to very rapid changes in the environment. And so each of these sites is equipped with a Phenocam and these towers. And again, I just want to highlight that all of these sites are within about a kilometer of one another. And so they're roughly experiencing the same climatology. I'm highlighting these two specific variables because I'm going to show the carbon response to these variables later. And so on the top, we have vapor pressure deficit, which if you're not familiar with that, it is just a measure of atmospheric dryness. So it's the difference of how much the atmosphere can actually hold, how much moisture the atmosphere can hold versus what is currently in the atmosphere. And then on the bottom is air temperature. And what's noticeable is that there's not too much different across each of these sites. They're all experiencing roughly the same temperature and VPD throughout the season. But what we do notice is that the grassland is receiving a bit more precipitation in these couple of highlighted events here in the red. And if we look at this as a GPP, since we're gross primary productivity across the same season, this is all data from 2022. We see this bimodal behavior that exists for that grassland. It's a little more muted in the shrubland in the green, and it's not really that highlighted in the novel or that transitional state between the two in members. And it does seem to follow this precipitation regime. So we have these events that happen and the grasses light up. It's flashy and it's patchy. And again, this highlights some of the variability that's driving that variability in global carbon estimates when we extrapolate this to drylands broadly. Now, if we start to look at how each of these meteorological variables are influencing GPP at each of these sites, this is the full year of data, and we see this increase in GPP as temperature increases and as VPD increases, which is nothing that we wouldn't expect, nothing too surprising there. But what is kind of surprising is this drastic decline at the shrubland at about 30 degrees C, and it also seems to become more stable and then decline sooner than the other two sites of the shrub-invaded grasses. I'm going to show a figure right after this because I question the biological relevance of using the full year of data because it's before anything's growing. You know, if you look at the Phenocam, there's there's before the rains come, before there's really growth on the vegetation. And so isolating these results to the growing season, which I used a pretty loose definition of the growing season. I'm just using May through September data with high light as well filter. But we start to see some more nuanced trends. So after this consistent decline at about 30 degrees Celsius, we also see this what seems to be almost a recovery at the shrubland site, and then or at least stabilization at 35 degrees Celsius and about 4.5 kPa. And I don't want to push these results too far because we don't really know exactly how they'll respond to even higher temperatures, but it could be advantageous, you know, if we're thinking if the thought is that we're going to experience increased likelihood of transitioning between grasslands to shrublands, this might be good if we know that the future is going to be hotter and drier, if our vegetation across the landscape is going to be able to recover from this stress. But again, we don't know. Like, will these plants stabilize as we move into hotter and drier climates? Will they improve their function with some adaptability, improve their efficiency and recover, or will they crash? Further data will be able to let us know what's going on in the future, but it's really exciting to kind of explore these dynamics. And I highlight these variables in particular because I'm working on a relatively simple model. And when I run the random forest model to predict carbon dynamics using green chromatic coordinate, which is derived from Phenocam. So it's a vegetation indices that's derived from that high frequency near surface image, coupled with some readily available air temperature and VPD data. Those two variables are consistently among the most important variables informing our predictions of carbon alongside a vegetation indices. Yet we just saw that the sites aren't necessarily responding to those the same way, and with the expectation of those getting higher in the future, we're not really sure what's going to happen. So estimating this some daily GPP from this vegetation indices and some gridded metadata, we're really able to capture this bimodal behavior of the grasslands, or we're able to capture most of the peaks, not so well in the shrubland, but we're able to get a good idea and do pretty well with these high frequency and near surface of data products. But if I just switch out one parameter, so instead of using green chromatic coordinate from those near surface phenocams and use enhanced vegetation indices from a satellite, we're unable to capture that bimodal behavior, or overestimating GPP at the tails, and it's not capturing those peaks. So really the driver of why it's so important that these very different sites are so close in proximity is that this is at a scale that satellites just are really unable to capture the heterogeneity of the landscape. And so using near surface information is just going to really improve our ability to predict things, constrain our models, and the response to these environmental drivers. And I know I'm going over, Madeline, I'm sorry. Those are my final thoughts, and just like thanks to the Phenocam and the technicians that help, and the other postdoc who supplied HLS, and my fearless leader, Don Browning. Thank you.